What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. So vinyl records are pretty much everywhere nowadays, but today I'm talking about whether or not it's still just a passing trend. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So by the time this video comes out, we might have the Record Store Day Black Friday list. And if it's not out yet, it should be out pretty much any day now. And thinking about Record Store Day Black Friday got me thinking about vinyl records overall. And with the vinyl revival that started around 2008, almost 20 years later, there's a lot of people out there that still look at records as this passing fad. It seems like this topic kind of comes up around Record Store Day Black Friday every year, about where this trend is at and what the future of vinyl records even looks like. Because part of the big argument around records has long been that a lot of it has to do with nostalgia, and a lot of the revival is around nostalgia. It's nostalgia driven, at least, and because of that, a lot of the growth that records has had over the last 20 years, a lot of that's temporary. I did a video a couple of weeks back about how the growth of records has kind of slowed over the last like 12 to 18 months. But by the end of the year, we're still going to see growth in the record market. And if it's just some temporary fad, that's not something that you're going to see year after year for almost 20 years. So I think there's been this big cultural shift over the last, 15 to 18 years towards more physical music. Even though streaming is not going anywhere, streaming is going to be the main form, the main way that music it gets distributed to people out there. I don't think vinyl records or CDs are going anywhere anytime soon. But as so many of us have talked about over the last couple of years, cost being the big issue. As prices go up and as the cost of new records have gone up over the last couple of years, I'm seeing more and more people kind of step away from records, because as people have had less disposable income, it's harder to drop $40+ on a new record. But let's also looking at the market at a very small period of time. If you look at it over the long term, as markets rebound, as the economy gets better, as people have more disposable income, I don't think cost is going to be as much of an issue. Just as long as prices kind of stable out, at least stay roughly where they're at now. Of course, vinyl records were the dominant music format from the 50s all the way through the 80s. I think the culture around music that's existed for the last 60 years around 8-tracks, and then it was cassettes, and then CDs, and we've seen all that kind of get really popular and then fade away. And I think that's why so many people look at the vinyl revival that we've had since 2008 or so and kind of look at that as just a passing fad and expect that to gain in popularity as it has over the last couple of decades. And then at some point they expect that to kind of fall off again, because all those other music formats at some point did. But for some reason, I think vinyl records have always been a little different. Records have always been unable to kind of withstand the pressures from other formats. I think as far as physical formats of music goes, I think there's always going to be pros and cons to every format. But I think when you weigh the pros and cons, I think CDs and vinyl are probably the biggest two. And for people that say that it's always nostalgia, it's nostalgia that brings people back to records, I don't think that's always the case, because there are younger generations of people that didn't necessarily grow up with records that still love records and buy records and have been part of the vinyl revival, since 2008, 2009. Something I do kind of look at as a fad in record collecting, and something that I hope will kind of trail off over the next several years, is this collector's mentality. And that's along the lines of, all these different like anniversary pressings and all these different variants that are out there. Even though I do enjoy collecting variants, I think some of it has gotten a little out of control. I know a lot of people like to pick on Taylor Swift and all the variants she likes to release, but I like to pick on the Rolling Stones, because when the Rolling Stones released Hackney Diamonds, there was like 40 different variants of that album, with every single Major League Baseball team having its own cover for that album, which I don't know. I never understood the connection between the Rolling Stones, who are an English rock band, and Major League Baseball. It just, when they released the album, it just didn't make any sense to me. So it's stuff like that. It's that kind of stuff that I think hopefully we'll get away from over the coming years. Because overall, I don't think the record market is a trend. It's not a passing trend. It's not a fad. But I think there are passing trends within the record market or within the record industry. Something else that I think really kind of fights against the idea of records just being a fad is the adaptation from these big box retailers. Once big box stores got involved and started having their own exclusive releases, and they started seeing the money that could be made from record sales, it no longer became a small, like, regional record store exclusive market. Because there's a lot of places, at least here in the US, that don't have an independent record store. And yes, there are a lot of record stores. You can go on their website, you can buy an album from them, and they'll ship it to you. But, there are lots of places in the US that don't have a record store that you can just drive to and go through. But in a lot of those places, they still have Walmarts, they still have Targets. Yes, they aren't going to have the same selection that your independent record store is going to have. And yes, you're not going to be able to go to Walmart and talk to the person working in the electronics department about the newest upcoming bands like you can in your local record store. It's all about access. You have access to records in parts of the country that just don't have record stores. And I think as long as we have big box retailers being a part of the market, it's not going to be a passing fad. It's not going to be just a trend that just goes away in several years. And yes, you're starting to see Target kind of pull away from the market. I've been in several Target stores within the last several months, and their CD and their vinyl record selection is getting smaller and smaller. But if you go on their website, they still have thousands of records, thousands of CDs for sale on there. So even if you live in a part of the country where you don't have access to a local record store in the area, Target has brand name recognition. You go on their website, you can see records on there, you can buy from them, have them shipped to you. So they're still a part of the big market overall. I've said for a long time, having younger generations get into records, getting into CDs, is what's going to keep continuing the growth in records and in CDs for the next coming decades. And where a lot of them are discovering CDs and discovering records are through these big box retailers, Walmart, Target, Amazon. They discover records through there. Hopefully they'll grow in their collection, and that's when they start branching out, going to record stores, discovering that there's a whole new world in music outside of those big box retailers. Because there's some big reasons why people buy records and are kind of moving away from streaming services. Even though everyone still streams music, I still stream music. I say a vast majority of people out there still stream a majority of their music. Over the last, 15 to 18 years, records have been eating into some of that market share that streaming services have, because records do have some kind of special value that you don't really get from, holding onto your phone and playing music through it. There's a sound quality difference with records that you don't get from streaming service. Yes, you're getting more lossless services out there. Spotify is the biggest streaming service out there. They just went to lossless audio, but you're still not getting true lossless audio from them. Because of the way the Spotify app functions, you're not getting the true lossless quality from it. But, it's there. It's getting better, but still, in my opinion, not quite as good as what you're getting from other services. But I still prefer the sound quality that you get from records and CDs from any streaming service that's out there. Of course, having the tactile experience of holding the big artwork, the flipping through the liner notes on the album, it all plays a role in the music experience that you just don't get from a streaming service. And that's something I think younger generations have been hooking onto, and that's what's drawing them into records and CDs. And something else I've noticed over the last couple of years is when it comes to the cost of records, younger kids, they don't really care about the cost of records. Yes, us older people, we remember the days of paying, $20 or $25 for new records. These 18 to 25-year-old kids, yes, they don't have the disposable income that older people do, but, they don't seem to be as sticker shocked by a $35 to $38 new record. And that's why I think, they're going to be the ones that are really going to be helping push the growth of records over the next several decades. But I do see some of the arguments for this just being a fad. There is some oversaturation that's definitely gone on in the record industry over the last several years. I did a video not too long ago about these same reissues that we're seeing kicked out, every couple months of these big albums. Rumors by Fleetwood Mac, Michael Jackson Thriller has been reissued a bunch of times, Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. You could name off, several dozen other albums. Pretty much any Beatles album has been repressed to death over the last several years. It seems like the industry is just kind of cranking out the same reissues every few months. They're really kind of oversaturating the market because of it. I think for about the 75th time in this video, I'm going to bring up pricing, because I think pricing is an issue in the long term, because I think if you look at average prices for new releases now, you're in like the $30 to $40 range, which is a lot compared to what it was, 6, 8, 10 years ago. Once the average price of new releases creeps up over $40, if we get to an average of like $45 to $55, I think that's when you're going to see a steep decline in sales. And that's, I think, when records really truly becomes just a passing fad. I know there's a report that came out, I don't know, it was probably a year or two back now, that said like 50% of record owners didn't even own a turntable. I think it's another argument that kind of leans towards it being kind of a trend. I think that stat kind of lies, is a little misleading, because I was somebody that was in that category at one point in time. I remember I was in between turntables for a while. It was like, it wasn't a long time, period of time. It was probably like a couple of months where I went without having a turntable. I was still buying records, but I didn't have a turntable for a couple of months. So I technically was one of those people, but I mean, I've got several turntables now and lots of records. So I mean, it's one of those things where you could take a figure and it doesn't necessarily paint the entire picture. There still are lots of people out there that have records that don't own turntables, and that's kind of where it becomes like the 90s Beanie Baby kind of comparison, or even like baseball and football cards in the 80s and 90s, where it's just like a collection. And if it's just a collection and it really has no like true meaning to the person that has it, it's really easy for them to just kind of step away and move on from it. Or if you're somebody that buys a bunch of albums just because you think one day you'll be able to turn around and sell them for a fortune, it's just a fad. It's just something that's easily walked away from. It's just the trendy thing to do. And I think that's still a very small percentage of the people that buy records. I think there's some big signs, though, that records are here to stay. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. You see new pressing plants popping up. You see pressing plants expanding. You do see some long-term investment into the industry, into the infrastructure of records. Now, granted, I would love to see us get to a point where record labels are actually investing into pressing plants. I think that's the point where you can say, look, the fad talk is over. Records are definitely here to stay. And we're going to see even more growth in records in the coming years. And the interesting thing we're seeing about some of these new pressing plants that are popping up is they're not just a standard pressing plant. We're actually seeing more audiophile style plants coming up. I don't think we'll ever get back to a point in time where we had like 700 pressing plants across the US like we did in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I think seeing growth in that area that we've seen over the last couple of years, I think is a really important step forward for the market. And something else I've noticed over the last couple of years I think is a really strong sign for records moving forward is you're starting to see smaller artists and smaller labels pressing bigger batches of records. If you go back like 6, 7, 8 years ago, a lot of those bands, a lot of those labels were pressing, 300 to 500 copies of an album, whereas now you're seeing over 1,000, over 1,500 copies of an album getting pressed because they know they can press those quantities of albums and easily sell them, which I think is another really strong indicator of where the market is right now and where even smaller bands and smaller labels think it's going to go in the coming years. So looking into the future, do I see a day where records are ever going to overtake streaming? No. Like I said, streaming is not going anywhere. Streaming is going to be the main focus for music for the foreseeable future. But I think there could be a lot of growth in the vinyl record market. I think it's always going to be seen as this more like luxury style niche, but in the music sphere, I think it's going to be the second biggest format next to streaming. There are some possible risks there, though. Economic downturn can definitely play a big role in its market share overall, because as we've seen over the last year or so, as people kind of turned away from records a little bit, they're not going to CDs. The numbers show they're actually going back more so to streaming. So if there were some big economic downturn, I think that really would cause a collapse in the record market. So of course, that's looking at long term. If everything stays fine and flat and we don't see anything like that happen, I think the market overall is going to be just fine. And as long as they keep investing in pressing plants and we don't have any more of those bottlenecks in production, I think it's another thing that really could ensure the overall success of records in the long term. Because if you're not able to produce records, that of course is going to be another issue moving forward. So I think overall, like looking towards the future of records, it's not going away anytime soon. I think there are some aspects of record collecting that have, fad-like issues with them. I think the popularity of records, are definitely going to go up and down over the years. I don't think we're going to see double-digit gains in popularity that we've seen over the last, 15 plus years I don't think we'll see that kind of moving forward. But I think there's going to be positive gains every year for records. Even though it might be a really small gain, I think we'll still see gains moving forward. What's looking out for you today, guys? Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think of this. Do you think vinyl records are here to stay? Or do you think, on some level, it's just kind of a hype bubble that's going to burst at some point? Because like I said earlier, I can see some of the arguments on both sides. I still think it's overall the record market is very strong moving forward. There is some things that kind of give me pause. I think some of the collector mentality, I hope, will go away at some point. I said it before, when it comes to variants, I think we've gotten a little out of control. It's gotten a little out of hand. I think having 2, 3, at the most maybe 5 or 6 variants of an album is just fine. But once you get in like 10, 15, 20, like I said, the Rolling Stones had over 40 of it with Hackney Diamonds. When Ghost released Impera a couple years ago, there was like over 35 different variants of that album. And both of them are good albums, but, it's just out of hand. It's just crazy to have that many different copies, that many different variants of an album. I'm fine with just having like a standard pressing of an album and then have a couple of different variants, have an indie exclusive, have like a couple of big box store exclusives. Hopefully at some point we'll get away from some of that. But I don't know, let me know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.